Which McLaren driver is actually the quickest? I ran the numbers on both qualifying and race pace for the entire season. I had my theories going into this one, but I was pretty shocked at the numbers. This graph represents qualifying data, with Lando being marked in blue and Oscar being marked in green. Something interesting to note about this graph is that the y-axis only goes from P1 to P10, because no McLaren driver has qualified outside of the top 10 for the entire year, which I find pretty crazy. You may also note that it's kind of up and down. Like, looking at this graph, you can't really make any kind of estimations because it seems to be one on pole this week, the next on pole next week, and they're sort of shifting up and down all over the graph. Each of them have sort of an equal number of bad weekends, an equal number of great weekends. So what is the actual head-to-head? If you take every single qualifying session, that's both feature races and sprints, and you put them against each other, the head-to-head between Piastri and Norris is 15-14, with Piastri taking the dub. Now this already looks close, but wait until you hear the gap. I kind of had this in my head going through the entire season as a fan watching the season. I had this idea that Norris was a poorer qualifier than Piastri. Piastri was a better qualifier, but I thought that Norris had better race pace, right? That was my idea. So when I finally saw that it was 15-14, which really there's nothing in it at all, that's not even a statistically significant gap at all, I thought that was pretty wild. I really was surprised by that, but not as surprised as when I calculated how much the average gap was between the two of them on qualifying. And that average gap, if you take every qualifying session, the margin by which one out-qualified the other, and you average those out, the gap is 0.065 seconds. 0.065. Like, I can't believe how close that is. It's crazy. I can't think of another driving pairing, maybe Albon and Sainz, who are even remotely that close. Think about the difference between Max Verstappen and Yuki Tsunoda, who are the largest gap. That's 6/10, almost 7/10. Look at this. 0.065, that's 6.5 100ths of a second, which I think is crazy. These guys, 29 times, the two of these guys have done laps around a track, and the gap that they could eke out, the gap that, Oscar could eke out over Norris is 0.065 seconds, which is nothing. That's nothing. That's essentially equal. I can't look at this data and say, oh, you know what, I think Piastri is the better qualifier. This is like one session that went Piastri's way where it could have gone Norris's way. These guys are equal. They are equal on qualifying pace. But what about race pace? When I analyze race pace numbers, I like to use a box and whisker plot. Now, if you're not a stats nerd, you may not have seen one of these since high school, so I'll give you a quick rundown. A box and whisker plot has a couple of lines: the upper whisker, the upper hinge, the median, the lower hinge, and the lower whisker. And it's really about quantities, right? It's about like how many of the laps are in each quartile, each section, right? So I'll highlight them for you. A quarter of the laps would fall into the first quartile, a quarter of the laps would fall into the second quartile, a quarter of the laps into the third quartile, and of course, a quarter of the laps into the fourth quartile. And of course, that removes any outliers, which would fall completely outside of the box plot, like pit laps and that kind of thing. But the golden number that we're really looking for here is the median. So why the median? Why is the median important? The median kind of represents the average lap. Well, not the mathematical average lap, because there's a reason why we use the median and not the average. The average is unreliable because, for example, if you had a guy who did 10 laps and 9 of those laps were 10 seconds, but the 10th lap was 20 seconds because he got a puncture or, whatever the case may be, he went off the track. If you took the average lap and you asked the person, oh, what was the average lap like? They'd say, oh, well, it was around 10 seconds. But the mathematical average would pull the average, it would be higher than 10 seconds because the outlier lap, that 20-second one, would be pulling it up by some amount. So we don't use the mathematical average, we use the median. Now, what the median does is it ranks every single lap across the race in ascending order, so from slowest to, or from fastest to slowest, and it just takes the middle one. It takes the middlemost lap, where you can say half of the laps were quicker and half of the laps were slower. And that gives you a really good, like, average lap. So if we take the box plot for Lando and Oscar for every single race across the whole season, and then we averaged out those medians to figure out, like, what is their average speed around an average track over the course of the entire year on race pace, I think what we find is pretty interesting. Now, keep in mind what I said earlier, right? In my head, over the course of the season, I thought that Oscar was a better qualifier, but Lando was quicker in race pace, right? Now, I was right, technically, but by how much? The difference between Oscar and Lando's race pace over the course of an entire season with hundreds and hundreds of laps raced is 0.05 seconds. 0.05. That is absurd. It's absurd. It's half of a tenth of a second. I mean, half of a tenth of a second. Think about a track. There are some tracks that are over 5 kilometers long. Tracks have, over a dozen corners most of the time. These guys are going round and round and round 40, 50, 60, 70 times in a given race. And over every lap that these two guys have done in every race over the course of the year, the pace difference between the two of them is less. It's a half tenth. It's 5/100ths of a second, which is it's a blink of an eye. It's nothing, really. Which to me is insane. I mean, it's unfair again. It's unfair to say, I mean, I know, the screen says Norris wins, but it's unfair to say Norris wins. They're the same. I mean, they are the same. These two numbers are the same number. And I think that's incredible. So let's put those two numbers next to each other again. And just reflect for a moment on the fact that we have one of the closest driver pairings, I think perhaps in the history of the sport. I would love to do an analysis, by the way, and compare this to, for example, Max and Lewis 2021 or Lewis and Nico 2016. I wonder if it's ever been this close. These two guys are equal. These two guys are equal drivers. And any argument that one driver is significantly better than the other is just wrong. It's not supported by the stats. So yeah, I was blown away by this. And I think you should be too. Thanks a lot for watching. Cheers.